How's it going, buddy?
Hey, we're back, but we're in different locations than last time. We're keeping it fresh. I'm back in Chattanooga. You are up in Wisconsin. Yeah, we're just crossing each other, waving on the interstate, saying goodbye and saying hello. And we say hello to you. Today is April 4th, 2022. Welcome aboard, folks. This is the Crushing Iron Podcast, and we are episode 570, the Big 570.
Yeah, man, you're nailing it.
Thank you. I feel honored today. It's a Monday. I'm catching up from a little spring break action. You're taking a little bit of a break yourself as we ease on into the busy racing season that I'll go over here in a little bit. But for those of you tuning in, welcome. We appreciate you giving us your time. We know you have a lot of options in the triathlon podcast universe and just podcasts in general, that your time is valuable. So we appreciate you tuning in today. We cover it all. We'll do race previews. We'll do race recaps like today. We'll have on the occasional guest. But for the most part, Mike and I, as coaches, athletes, best friends, we just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through, both as humans on this planet and coaches and athletes. We'll also use the athletes that we work with to drive this discussion of the day. We work with a very wide range of athletes all across the globe, from beginner level athletes looking to complete their first sprint or Olympic, all the way up through elite level amateurs trying to get back to Kona and everything in between. The majority of our athletes are here in the good old US of A, but we work with a lot of athletes internationally as well. So don't be afraid to reach out if you are across the pond, and we'll use the feedback and communication we have with those athletes to drive the discussion some days, because let's be honest, we're all going through the same stuff, just a little bit different and specific for each and one of us. We'll also go into our Facebook group, which is Crushing Iron Group. If you want to be a part of that conversation, just answer one simple question. We'll let you right in. A lot of great people in there, wonderful community. People in there always want to help a hand, a lot of experience as well. So now that racing season is upon us, chime in, give us some feedback and answer some questions and get them answered. That's it. We don't do sponsors. We don't do ads. The only agenda that we have is to keep you happy and healthy in your endurance sports journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I heard the Facebook group had a lot of action this weekend, but I wouldn't have known because I was at my mom's cottage and we didn't have internet.
No interwebs.
No interwebs. And I just, nor did we have cable, so I couldn't watch that game on Saturday. But it's interesting to be sort of out of that loop for a couple days. I didn't hate on it, but I appreciate my athletes giving me a little patience here, catching up. I came back to my mom's house last night. We were at the cottage for the weekend, and then now at the house we have it here. So I was catching up last night, Sunday night training peaks. You know how it goes.
I do know. I've been doing it all day today, catching up from about a week, about a week unplugged. But it wasn't quite a week. There was a incredibly busy week racing. The North American calendar kicked off. We had Oceanside 70.3 on Saturday. We had a bunch of athletes doing that. Then we had Texas 70.3, and man, did they get some great weather. It really was exciting. It was the first kind of bigger weekend where the phone's going off, the tracker's going off, early morning text messages, before people get in the water and race. And then, kind of like the next, 6-7 hours as people make their way in. It was fun. It was exciting. It was Oceanside 70.3 was a huge race. We talked about it last Friday. I think we did the podcast and made some predictions. It was definitely a little bit off on the men. Jackson Laundry took the W, which honestly I should have been paying more attention to that. Honestly, he was, I think, third at 70.3 Worlds last year, and was the fastest Canadian on the day. Lionel Sanders came back through and ran through a lot of the field, had a kind of a photo finish with Rudy Von Berg, and he came in third. And then Taylor Knibb, as I definitely predicted, absolutely smashed the women's field. And if you don't know her name and all you know is Daniela Reeve or Ann Hogg or Chrissy Wellington, check her out. Look her up. She is a absolute superstar. And she absolutely dominated the field, the women's field from start to finish. She's a young American, ITU background, and an absolute powerhouse on the bike. So look out for her. I doubt she's moving up at all anywhere anytime soon to the Ironman distance she'll be doing. I think trying to go back to Paris, I think, for the Olympics, and then doing 70.3s. But she absolutely dominated the day. Outside TV had their first broadcast and production for Ironman. They're not doing all of the the past few years have been doing Facebook Live. And to be honest with you, having watched the outside TV stream, I would almost, and I hate saying this, I would honestly prefer the Facebook Live, because they had Ironman South Africa as well, and I watched a little bit of that on Sunday while Texas was going on, and I felt like the live stream was better on Facebook. The outside TV when it was glitchy, given I was also kind of semi watching it on the way back from Florida on an iPad. But I was being safe. I promise I was being safe. I was more just listening to it. But it was a ton of ads, and it was just whatever. But Oceanside itself is awesome. It was pumped. It was exciting. It's great to see open water swims like that. The waves are always rough. It's just one of the more iconic 70.3s on the planet. So one of the very big time ones. San Diego used to be a huge training ground for pros. Still is, but now it's like Tucson and Boulder and all those places. But it's always loaded. It's age group loaded. Like, I mean, absolutely maxed out. It's a great early season race, and now with Ironman St. George being a world championship this year in May, it was a kind of a early season tester. And there was honestly a lot. I took a lot away from it, just watching the professionals and the age groupers and tracking our athletes. And then obviously the next day, we've talked about Texas 70.3 a lot the last 3 or 4 years. I've done it. Did it, 4 or 5 years ago. I went down there last year, tried to go down there 2 years ago during the pandemic, got turned around halfway. And did they have stellar weather or what? They finally had like the most perfect day you're going to have. It's obviously going to be windy in Galveston, up there on the seawall, but they got a beautiful, beautiful day. It was not too hot. It was not too windy. It was perfect PR conditions. And I'm sure people that were there wouldn't argue. All the athletes that we had seemed to have an absolute blast. But it's just, as coaches, and I kind of mentioned this in our email this morning, when you go through, you got races in October, September, and November. And I think this is very true for coaches and for athletes, is that I'm on spring break, and anytime I kind of I say spring break like I'm in
Yeah, I
college.
mean,
I'm like
I know.
it's just it's
Are you
effing
gonna just
vacation.
admit it was a vacation,
It was a
or just gonna
vacation.
keep
It's
calling
like
it
it was my
spring break?
kids like spring break. It's like, listen, I haven't spring breaked it since like 2003. Okay, it was like I haven't hit up the strip in Panama City and Club La Vila in a long time. It was not spring break. It's parenting with your kids out of school in a different location. That's what spring break is when you get older. So it was definitely
Okay.
not. It was definitely not spring break. It was just vacation. It was spring vacation. It was for me. It was pre-race season vacation, taking a little time off. And again, I kind of what I mentioned in our email this morning. And again, I think coaches feel this way, and so do athletes. But when you get so far from racing, the race that you focus on, maybe you ended the year in October, November, maybe, or even September. When you get this is the farthest we are away from the last time we really knew what it felt like to race. And I think as athletes, when you're consistent, when you chip away, even if you're doing 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, you're maybe just, a pool sprint here and there. It's an indoor try. You never really know, right? And like, a lot of people like to calculate or guesstimate, what they think they're capable of, and is their hard work paying off? And you never, no matter how well you test or how consistent you are, you never know until you step in the water and the cannon goes off and it's time to go. And so even as a coach, you kind of like, you're taking like, I wonder if we did things right. I wonder if we did enough. You're always kind of asking questions and trying to think through things, and always, you don't always doubt yourself, but you always have that kind of, I think, healthy um, self-criticism. It's like, did we do it right? Did we do enough? How's the day going to unfold? And then you have, great example. You have two totally different races. You got Texas, which is flat. The swim wasn't as hard as it usually is. The run's pancake flat. It was perfect conditions. Then you've got, and the day before that, you had a race like Oceanside, which is a much, much more difficult course than a race like Texas. The swim is incredibly difficult. You saw, like, if you watch any of like the coverage, it's a beach run-in start, which I absolutely adore and love. And there was like huge waves coming in. The chop was it kept a lot of the pros, like the first pack together. The bike course is really, really tough. Like, people think California, think, it's probably gonna be flat or whatever and easy. It is a brutal bike course. And then the run course is no joke either. It's a very tough course. And so you may have ended the year with, maybe faster times, or you're looking, and I even had this with, a couple of our athletes there. You're looking at their splits and their times, and you go back to like their last race that they did, which could be totally different, right? You're trying to compare things, and then the day ends up, and you're like, I wonder if they're going to be happy. I wonder if they're going to be happy. Because as a coach, it's like, I think athletes sometimes like think that we know every athlete's PR, or course PR, but you don't, right? It's not something you pay attention to. It's frankly not something that you're even obsessed with or even talk about. You're just focusing on extracting the most you can out of every athlete with the opportunities that you have and how life presents. And then when the day is over, I'm like, oh, I'm really happy. I'm really happy. And you're like, oh, okay, well then I'm happy too. It's just it's a race season is always full of so many emotions and so many also objective lessons that I think we should have as coaches and athletes. The same as that, every course is different, every year is different, every season is different, and even the different stages you're going to be in, during course of the season. Was it, an early season, dust the rust off race, and be happy with it where you are considering the training block. Was it your A race? Was it the same course you can compare to over the last few years? There's just a lot of value in it, but as long as you're kind of keeping things objective for where you are and what you're doing, it makes it fun and it makes it easy. But where your athletes get in trouble is if you compare every race to every, different race, then you might think, oh, I'm not getting fast enough, or, I expect to do better, without kind of rolling back and doing a rewind session of the last 4 to 6 months, seeing how things added up. But no, it was just I'll shut up in a minute. It was great to kick off the season. Great to see athletes going back at it, especially this time of year. This is the first March, April, we've had in 3 years. If you think about it, we didn't have
Right.
much of a season, and so there's nothing to complain about. It's awesome. I'm ready for the season to get rolling, and our squad had a spectacular weekend of racing, and I'm ready for the weeks to keep rolling.
Yeah, what you're saying there, man, I think I think early season races are difficult as it is, and then you add in the last 2 years. You add in a lot of, I mean, because there's not really a rhythm. I feel like that's one of our biggest challenges the last 2 years is finding that rhythm. We talk about consistency and training and everything, but just finding a rhythm. And then you're going to go out to California or anywhere, and you're going to race, and maybe, I don't know, you probably didn't have a ton of outside training, and if it was in weird conditions a lot of times. And you know how it goes, man. As the summer sort of rolls on, you just kind of become more and more sort of, I guess, immune to being in stickier situations. But early on, it's like you're not, it's not most athletes, I feel like, don't really kind of get into their groove in time. Maybe they get a couple weeks of good training or whatever. But I always think about it when I played college baseball. We played, we would take spring break to go play. But for 2 months before that, we were in a gym, in a batting cage, taking ground balls on linoleum
Mm-hmm.
floors and shit like that, where there really wasn't a full size field or anything like that. And we're trying to emulate, cutoffs and stuff like that, like we're 15 feet away from the guy, like act like you're, at the fence, throwing it to the, and I was just standing there in the short. But then we would get on a bus. I remember one year we got on a bus and drove, like seriously, like to uh, Fort Lauderdale from Wisconsin. It was like 30 hours or something like that. Sleeping on a bus, and it just turned out that we got off the bus the morning at, like, we got into, like, our game was at 10 a.m. and we got into the ballpark at 6 a.m. We literally just drove there. And we were playing Florida Atlantic, and they were like 23-6 or something like that already. We hadn't even stepped outside to play baseball yet. They were all wearing gold chains, and they just beat the shit out of us. But I'm just saying, there's like a whole thing if you're, especially if you're probably from Texas, and I know Texas, the full, and I think the half usually has a pretty good contingent of, good athletes from the South,
Mm.
and probably the same from California. And you kind of go into that world and you're a little bit overmatched just because you've been kind of on a trainer a lot. You haven't really been in your flow yet. So I think these early season races, and even when I was, like Chattanooga's a pretty early season race here, and that's coming up. But I never feel like I'm kind of really on my game. I've felt like that once, but living close in the South helps. When it was, I lived in Nashville, so it was really kind of a climate adjustment. I was always ready for whatever, and I just think sometimes that Yeah, like you call them dust offs, and I think that's a good way to put it. And I think like it's very difficult, I think, sometimes to come out and pull off a really solid race your first one, especially after the last 2 years.
It's incredibly difficult, and again, like I don't think we can understate how how hard and how distant many of athletes have become from what racing feels like and what's required and how deep you've got to go when you race. We forget things. I think as humans, we forget things very, very quickly. Um, and then when you forget, like, I think we talked about it last year, I think mid-season maybe, it was just how hard racing is. It's incredibly hard. And I think that's just something that a lot of people forget. And again, like going back to like this is the first time in 3 years we've been racing in March and April. You've had that early season, opportunity to do things, and I don't think you can understate that. And I think there's just the biggest thing they talk about. You talked about going and playing these teams and playing outside, and you've been inside the whole time. When they talk about the biggest difference in going from college to pro, the first thing they say is the speed.
Yeah.
Totally different game. And I think that's very, very true. Um, when it comes to racing, you can control things, you can time things, you can work out at this, you're training alone, you can do things inside. Race day speed is totally different. So I think it's awesome for people to get out and dust the rust off and really just to kind of go through the motions again. It's just even if you raced last year, if you look back at the last 2.5, 3 years and how much you've raced versus how much you've not raced, it's unbelievable, right? The percentage is heavily weighed towards not racing almost at all. For like they may have raced once or twice last year, because a lot of people again hedged their bet towards the end of the year if they didn't race at all in 2020. So now you're looking at 2.5 years for some people that have barely raced. And there's just all the things that you feel like you used to be able to do with your eyes closed. Now you either need to relearn it or you need to reacclimate to the race day situation, the race day feel, all of that, to just because if you really, really want to know what your best fitness is like and get the best out of your body and do the best performance, you've got to blow it out once. You just have to get out there, go through the motions, do it all because you're gonna be faster the next time. You have been through transition in a while. You don't know what it's like to get your wetsuit off quicker. You know how to pace yourself. Like, yeah, you can tell yourself. You can absolutely tell yourself each in every training session or a big ride or big swim or big run, be like, I'm going to pace this ride, I'm going to fuel it right. But on race day, when there's a million other things going on around you, how are you going to pace it, right? Are you going to get distracted? Are you going to get caught up in the moment? You have to practice those. So you have to practice being patient. You got to practice being resilient. You got to practice toughing out. You can't get caught up in all these things. Again, so much easier said than done. And that's why getting out there in racing, where there's a sprint, Olympics, 7.3, whatever it is, get out there and just kind of blow out the cobwebs, remember what it feels like, and be able to step back and objectively say, all right, I did this right, I didn't do this right. Pacing was great, pacing wasn't great. But I think the biggest thing that most athletes can take away from the early season races is, even if it was you raced a lot last year or didn't, is the speed of race day, how much quickly things you have to make. You have decisions a lot quicker because they're a lot more impactful the longer the worse decision that you make. And then also what it feels like to dig that deep. Again, the farther you get away from callousing, yourself in terms of digging deep and working hard and being resilient and not giving up, the harder it becomes. And so when you can remind yourself, to go that deep and go to the hurt locker, if you will, you got to go there. You got to know where it is first, right? You have to know, like, but some people just forgot. They get there like, I don't, this doesn't feel good, because you have to push yourself to that limit and think, all right, can I go? Can I go a little farther? Yeah, I can. Can I go a little farther? Yeah, I can. Instead of being so worried, because obviously in training you don't want to do that. So just reminding yourself what it feels like to push and to really, really get after in race day is something that you need to remind not so much your body of, but remind trying to get back to a place mentally where you can tell your body what to do and convince it to go further and convince it to go faster and convince it to go harder, towards the end of the race. But in the opposite end, at the beginning of the race, tell it to hold back, tell it to be patient, let this, let my patience pay off. I mean, you saw this in the men's race at Oceanside. Lionel Sanders used to be like, just, he was considered the Uber biker in the sport the last 3 or 4 years. Now he's probably, maybe top 10 still. And it's not so much because he's decided to become not the best biker. It's because he's tried to become the best triathlete. He's under a new coach. You saw this in the race at Oceanside. He didn't catch the front of the group like a lot of people predicted he would have. But you could see it in his progression that something that he is actually getting a lot better at is he's holding back some. He knows he's going to get dropped in the swim. He's going to have time to make up, but in the past, at least pre-pandemic, Lionel was always concerned about, let me lead coming off the bike. Let me try to catch everybody as quickly as I can to make up for my swim deficit and then see what happens. Now, he's been just kind of he did this at Clash Miami, he did this at a few races last year, did it at St. George 70.3 Worlds, and you saw him come off the bike, I think 6th, and worked his way up to 2nd. He worked his way up through 4th, 3rd, and up into 2nd place in the last quarter mile. That thing alone, being able to have that confidence, and ultimately, because to me, patience is confidence. Patience in working the plan, trusting the process, and knowing that it doesn't matter if I'm losing for 70.1 miles. It matters where I end up at 70.3. And it's been an interesting mind kind of shift to see from him and his pacing strategy, to not go out, but to save things so he is one of the best runners in the sport, to save gaining 2 or 3 minutes on the bike to being able to gain 6 and moving up from, a 6th to a 2nd in a pretty solid field. And it takes practice, it takes patience, it takes confidence, and you get that with racing. You don't get it nearly as much in practicing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nuances in there too, because the patience element, there's been a lot of times when, frankly, I haven't been patient, but I've had pretty good results. But I think that that's the top end. You know what I mean? Like, I can go out and, for me, swim okay, and then bike really well, and then start that front half of that. Let's say we're doing 70.3, that first half, and do that pretty well. But then kind of, man, it's just like, especially if you're not, like you're saying, ready for, you haven't experienced the hurt locker in a while, if you're not ready for that, then that pain just seems like twice as intense for some reason. If you're not, that's kind of what I felt last year at the full at Chattanooga. So, but you can kind of hold on, but like as you get older and as you kind of stay around the sport for a while, you just really don't enjoy that. Like the idea of trying to hold people off is not as nearly as fun as trying to track them down, especially if you feel good. So I think there's something to be said there, man. Like if you can really work on that patience and think about like not only tracking people down, but like saving your best for that second loop, and then really doing something that you didn't think you were capable of. But how do you gauge that, right? And then how do you have that sort of patience to really let that happen? Because we see it all the time, right? Like people are fairly new to the sport or whatever, their first 2 or 3 miles are their fastest on the run, whether it's a full or a half. I mean, I see that kind of a lot. And if you're tough enough, then you can kind of hold yourself on and keep the wheels from falling off. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be your best race. You know what I mean? It can be a pretty good one. But I think if you can really show that patience off the get-go whether it's on the bike or on the run, and really show it throughout the race. I mean, it's like, what it is, right? It's putting it together throughout the whole race, not just showing patience here and there, even though that it all adds up. I mean, this is all like little nuances that, can't really put a finger on all the time, but just in general, having a good, calm, patient persona until, like you always say, that back half of that 70.3 half marathon, just then it's like run like hell, but don't run like hell out of the gate. And a lot of times I think we can run like hell because we're so nice and warmed up from the bike and we don't even realize it.
It's about what the total package is, right? Like I think athletes get really caught up in what they can do in practice. And we see this as coaches. We see this with, in professional sports. We see it in college sports. You hear people talk about time as like, you got players that really really perform well in practice, and then when they get under the lights, things just don't come together. They just never will. And it's usually a mental and emotional thing. It's the same thing with athletes and triathletes and coaching. You have athletes that routinely, if they are 3 weeks out from a race or there's not a race coming, they hit every workout. They are incredibly consistent. They've got listen, it's super easy to have confidence in what you're doing when you're not coming up on an opportunity to prove it. And a lot of
Yeah.
athletes, and this, dude, it's everyone's
Well, you got
struggle.
another shot,
Exactly. Well, there's no pressure, right? Because it's not
Right.
immediate, and I think that, listen, everybody feels like they're going to win the national championship in the preseason, until they play 3 or 4 games, like, oh shit, like, maybe we're not that good and we got a lot of work to do, or they figure out that they maybe are that good. But in athletes, really, especially when you get that, we all have an ego. We all get caught up in how good or how bad or how great, how improved we're going to be each and every year, regardless of how it did. But none of it matters until the rubber meets the road and you get that first foot in the water and the gun goes off and it's game time. And that is just something that you can't replicate. And you also can't replicate the enormity of the situation and the environment and the event that you're doing, that you've put so much stock in, that you've talked about for so long. You've been training for it for 5-6 months. And here's the thing: when you've seen all this improvement in training, you expect to see it on race day, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
No
Mm-hmm.
matter what. It's like the guy that who goes in the gym and he can hit 93 free throws. Uh, in the gym alone out of 100, 93%. But when it comes down to, 3 seconds left in the game, he's got a 1-and-1. Who are you putting on the line? And a lot of times it might not even be the 93%. It'll be the guy you think is clutch, who's just gonna make it, like the Robert Ory, if you will, of like a longtime Lakers fan, like Big Shot Rob. It's like Big Shot Bob. He would hit everything. He might be like 0 for 9 at the end of the game, down by 2. Who are you giving it to? Robert Ory, because he's just probably gonna make it. So you have people like that in training. And you see it a lot. You see with athletes who have trouble with testing. They have all the confidence in the world when the workout is asking of just the minimum, right? Which is just do the workout and check the box. There's nothing attached to it. There's no race result to be gained from it. It's just a workout. They can absolutely dominate, and then they get to races. And sometimes as a coach, you find yourself kind of scratching your head, being like, okay, something's not adding up here, right? And usually it's above the chin, and almost always is above the chin. They just freeze up, like you hear the phrase like seize the moment. Well, they are seized up in the moment, and you have this in all sports across all different age ranges. Athletes get so seized up and so they have compressed so much expectations, so much pressure upon themselves, that the closer they get to race day, things tend to not come out the way that you need them to. But in order for them to get out, you have to get out there. You have to be willing to go for it. You have to learn things. You've got to be patient. You've got to work your plan. Which is again a huge mind shift for a lot of athletes that we like the term bike for show, run for dough. A lot of athletes still have that. They will bike for show and then run for nothing, right? There is nothing. There is no dough to be had because they overbike. So to have the patience takes practice, right? In order to practice, you can't just practice it in training, right? You can kind of go through the motions, your dress rehearsal, but what happens when the curtains come up and and the lights come on, you got to really shine for it. Like that's when you figure out how well you're going to be able to execute. Like I had an athlete earlier today say, hey, I would just be curious to get your thoughts on, on things, on how my testing went the other week. And I was like, all right, well, let's see. You crushed all your swim paces. Check. You had a 5K PR by a lot. Check. And your power went up. Check. What else do you want to know? He's like, well, do you think I can be in the top end of the top half of my age group? And do you think I can do this? And I was like, dude, I'm not answering that question. I've never answered it. Never answered it. Like I've had many of athletes try to pry it out of me. And you won't get it into my dead cold hands. You won't ever get that kind of an estimate out of me, because I don't do it. Because what you do in practice while it's in training, which is while it's meaningful, doesn't guarantee you anything on race day, because so many things can happen with just yourself, with the environment, with the conditions, with your bike, with how you handle the swim, other people around you, expectations, stress. Like there's all these other, variables that come into play that you can't put that in as a coach, like, oh, we give them confidence. Well, no, because then I'm already putting a limit or a cap or a threshold you can't meet on race day, by giving you a number, because I might say, oh, you might be able, and according to my calculations, you should be able to do this. Nah, okay, I'm not buying in, because then you're thinking, oh, I can do that. And then what if you don't hit it? Or what if you're cruising along having the race of your life and you're 10 minutes ahead of time? And your next thought is, oh, I'm already 10 minutes faster than what coach said, so I've got this. I can just kind of cruise in it, instead of just blowing it out and seeing how truly fast and how well you can perform on one given day. It's not something you can practice again. It is a craft. It's something you have to learn. The only way to learn it is by racing it.
Mm. Yeah, and I do think that's true. Competition sort of, brings that out, and it makes you go through it and figure it out on the fly, and get familiar with it and everything like that. But I do like I've talked about this before, but the training sort of mindset, there's a lot of times when, say, I'll have a long ride on a Saturday or something, and then I'll have a long ride or a long run on a Sunday, and I could get into that run, and towards the end, for example, maybe a couple miles left, and I'm struggling a little bit. I kind of always try to put myself into a race at that point and decide, like, hey, when this happens, which it will, because that's the thing too, right? Is especially if you're doing fulls, it's very, very difficult to sort of replicate that feeling in training, that you're going to have on the back half of that marathon. But it can peek its head in there sometimes. And those are the times when I really try to say, okay, well, this is sort of the feeling. So how are you going to handle it? And then are you going to panic? Or are you going to just look for ways? And I'm always sort of looking for ways to make that, I don't know, I guess my flow, find more of a flow state, and then just like get out of that moment, get into it and get out of it at the same time. Because that's the thing, right? Is like, I think a lot of people, there's certain times in a race when you just feel like you're literally hitting a wall, and you have to figure out how to get through it, because, as Will Emery said a million times, is like, don't believe how you feel, because it's going to change, or it could change. So, but yeah, like what you said about the, there's all these guys. I always hear about, like, when I follow the Badgers a lot, we always have these guys that are supposedly don't miss 3-pointers in practice, and then they're like 2 for 27 in the season. And it's like, man, when are they going to come around? When are they going to come around? And there's something about just being lathered in that game that you have to be able to do. It's sort of like, that's why I'm such a big proponent of, like, almost over warming up before the swim, because I think a lot of people's second guessing can start in the swim. A lot of triathletes, they don't have a lot of confidence in the water. So, but how do you have confidence? It's like, if you're warmed up and you're kind of ready to go and do anything, if you feel more confident and you're just alive and awake, you're going to be more confident. So, like, if you hit that water and you're like, oh shit, that's cold, that's freezing, what, that's the last thing you want to start with, because I think it can set a bad tone. So for me, it's always about being patient, but also creating just that subtle lather throughout the race that gives you the confidence, and it kind of it's really a blood flow, um, restraint, but like being, not being passive, you know what I mean? And I think that's a hard spot to find for a lot of people. It's like, what's the edge? Where can I go to without going too far, but still being engaged in this whole process?
It's incredibly hard, because the only place you can find it is when you race. And that's just one of those things that, like, no matter how calculated and how much you want to predict what you're capable of on race day, in order to get the most out of you. Listen, it's easy to govern or to go for broke in a bike session on the trainer, right? Or at the track if you do track workouts, or in the swim when you can just stand up and be done and hop out of the pool into the hot tub, right? It's like, it's easy. It is so easy because there's no fail, right? And you have an easy out, right? No one's even going to know about it unless it's your coach, or maybe even no one, right? No one's going to have any idea. So there's literally no pressure, for most people. But when you get to the closer you get to race day, when everything is building up to it, your body and your mind react differently. Like I am totally of the mindset that, you have fight or flight, and how people respond to huge events in life. I totally think that that applies to how people race, right? You have athletes that are fight, and you have athletes that are flight, and that is just I think if you're wired that way, it takes a lot to overcome the flight. And I'm just going to take it easy, or I'm going to find a way out, or I'm going to find an excuse, or it's just not my day, or there goes the day, I got kicked in the face and got my goggles hit, there goes my PR, it's just not my day, or I lost a bottle. It's like, then you have the other ones that are like, I'm going to fight tooth and nail no matter what today. I don't care what I don't care what the numbers are, because what they want is when they cross the finish line, are you proud of yourself? Are you proud of yourself and the effort that you put in? And if the answer is yes, then everything else comes way, way down the list, way down, because that is something that's like a level of personal integrity that only you know. Right? Only you know that. That did you really give it your all, or did you back down sometimes? And every athlete, honestly, should be like incredibly frank and honest and objective with themselves. We've talked about it before on many podcasts. Like there's, the races that still grind me to the bone are the ones that I felt like I didn't have that extra gear. I held back. Maybe I have 6 gears, and I was like, yeah, 5 is about all I really, really, really want to go to today, because I don't know that I can handle it. It's that feeling, and that kind of, again, like the answer that only you know. The answer that only you know. Did you mail it in? Did you cut it short? Could you should have gone hard? Could you have gone hard and you just didn't, because you just didn't want it bad enough? Own that. We also have tons of athletes who do, and they say, what, I didn't want it bad enough today. I just didn't. And then you learn from it, and you go back and you kind of psychoanalyze. All right, why didn't I want it bad enough? It was something that did I have other demands going on in my life? I just didn't have the personal bandwidth to deal with it, or did you just didn't have it that day? Which is also the same. You hear professionals talk about it before. The best of the best have said, I just didn't want it bad enough today. I just didn't. And some people, oh, well, you're just not professional. I'm like, no, what do you mean not professional? They're human, right? We're all allowed that feeling. But again, in order to get the very best out of yourself, you've got to honestly, when you get done, did I give it my best? Yeah. And that's like the happiest races I've all had were because I felt like I extracted every ounce of what I had in me. The ones I'm more disappointed in, honestly, some of them have been like better quote unquote results against the field, whether it's podiums or wins or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I feel like I did pretty good, but there was definitely a few times where I feel like I could have done more. Like I could have pushed more. I was too hesitant. I didn't have enough confidence in myself, which just hopefully leads to, all right, how do I gain more confidence in that area? How am I able to, do certain things that allow myself, while not perfectly, right? Next time, you can't expect perfection, but how can I set myself up to be in a better spot next time when I do have these thoughts go through my head? What can I tell myself that'll convince myself to maybe push it farther, right? And learn those lessons. And again, you don't learn those in training, right? You can learn them under a microscope. It's a field test, right? It's a dress rehearsal. It's spring practice. None of it matters until, like, you see it all the time in so many sports. Like, but we think we're different because we're triathletes and we pick us up as a hobby. But like, you got the guys in college that were third stringers and they go to the pros and they're money, or they got spring practice, not really that great, and then game time, it's like totally different, right? The person who, and I kind of had this, it's not totally applicable, but I guess it is in a way. I mentioned it on Athlete this week, their comment, and they're talking about finding a flow or setting themselves up for success. And I said, it is so much better to be, and I feel like this is very applicable to going from training into racing, the expectations and being able to execute. And I said, it's better for you to go for 80% and be 100% at going that all the time versus shooting for 100% all the time and only making 50. because you're only getting half the stuff done, right? But if you like going back to the great is the enemy of good, and the more you practice things, the more you figure out how to respond, how to set yourself up for success. What situations are you good in? What situations are you not good in? Plan these things, and be ready for them. Don't just take a swing at a race and assume because your training went really, really well that you're owed this spectacular result. If you walk into a race expo and pick up your bib number and you think you're just checking a box because you trained great and you're able to do all your workouts perfectly on your shiny new treadmill at home, or your pain cave with your perfectly tipped refrigerator, or your pool with your black lines, you're in for a rude awakening. You're in for a flat out rude awakening.
Yeah. I mean, it's endurance sports, right? So, like, I love what you said there about 80% going 100% at 80%, because it's that range, right? That 70. What happened there? Train come through? You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So anyway, I love what you said there about going 100% at 80%, because, a lot of these races, I mean, like, if you're not comfortable and confident in that range, but like you can go on a bike and for 45 minutes to an hour and blast out some kind of ridiculous power numbers, and then, 2 days later be completely fried or whatever. You just don't understand I don't know. You've talked about it before, but it's almost like a drip, drip, drip kind of pain instead of just a big flood of a pain. You know what I mean? So it's just like we have to understand what that feels like in long increments. That's the whole thing about endurance sports. That's what I had to learn when I got into this sport, because I never did anything like that. The idea of being like, holy shit, I got to run 8 more miles at this pace versus, I know I can run faster, but how do I just settle in here and then hold it? And something else you were saying that was interesting, I thought, was this idea of, I've totally forgot what it was. I'm kind of disheveled by that. But
Kind of disheveled. Well, listen, I say a whole
no,
lot
I
of
know,
really
but
good
I
things
know
over
it's
the
like,
course of a
no,
year.
I know what it was. I got it. So it was like when you're in, when you're feeling good, right? And you're in a race, and you said you kind of weren't as proud of, maybe, even though you were having a good day, right? You're going well. I think sometimes it's even more difficult to find your stretch points when you're feeling good, because it's like, wait, I might have more, but I'm doing better than I thought I might be doing. So let's not push it. And I'm talking about, usually at the end, if you got something left, instead of being, it's risky, right? To kind of push out there when you're feeling good and things are going well, and you're like, all right, I'm racing this perfectly. This is exactly what I have. But in order to find that real limit, sometimes you got to take a chance when you're feeling good, and because then it becomes, you kind of be conservative and maybe a little too conservative or something like that. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes like like you said, when it feels really, really good, you almost don't want to do anything to just fuck it all up and make it go bad. So you're
Right.
almost not
Yeah,
even
it's a
willing
fine
to.
line.
Yeah, it's a very, very fine line to be like, man, I feel really, really good. I could just cruise with this and have a great day. And then in the back of your mind, you're thinking, but I could push it. And then you're like, nah, if I push it, I might implode, and then it won't be a good day. It'll be just, not that great of a day. But then the other end, you're thinking, but if I got this much in me and it's feeling smooth, maybe I have a little bit more in me. But it is a huge, like, the thinnest of thin lines, right? Between making these decisions and not, and that comes with practicing, right, in racing, but also
Mm-hmm.
in not just in practicing racing, but practicing in training, listening to your body, right? Knowing the signals that are telling you, the warning signs that are saying slow down, or the positive signs, right? The affirmational feelings we have that are like, all right, you got this, like keep going. And you can't, only you know that if it's time to pull the trigger or it's time to reload, right? Only you know that. No watch, no data set, no bike computer, no power meter, no nothing. Only you know that, because what the computer and what the other thing are telling you is like, what your output is. Your mind and your body are in charge of that, and you can't get overly, because listen, like, if you're feeling really, really good, the rest of the stuff shouldn't matter. You should just put, it's just background noise. But the more you listen to background noise, the more distracted you get, the more doubtful you become. And so while you can't practice like the digging deep and the patience and the execution and stuff on race day, during training, because there's so many things you can't do, you can't replicate. You can practice listening, right, to your body and making judgment calls and being responsible. And like, I had an athlete that had a really, really like amazing week of training. And so I just commented, I said, hey, you are training like is training out of this world right now. And I said, you're right now you're training very, very intelligently. And because it's listening to your body, pulling back, not pulling back, comments that make me think, hey, this week they're going to listen to their body. Like, that's when you know an athlete is firing on all cylinders. Nothing is leading the charge except for their mind, and their brain is being like, all right, I'm the governor. I can tell myself when to slow down or speed up. I'm looking out for all things. I'm kind of got my head on a swivel. I'm not just like head down getting these workouts done just because it's everything has. I'm being supremely mindful of everything that I'm doing, and every calculation that I'm making goes through a thought process that allows athletes to get the most out of them, because they listen, right? They listen for cues. Like, everybody knows these. Like, I have these certain cues in myself. Like, if I wake up or I'm going to a session, like, that doesn't feel right. Like, we all have this phrase, like, I feel just kind of off, right? And everybody's definition of off is different. Like, certain things signaling that you're feeling off. It could be nutrition, it could be dehydration, it could be stress, it could be lack of sleep, right? It could be all these things. Everybody has kind of their different combo of what feels off to them, and you're the only person that knows that, right? That you feel off, right? But we're also the only ones that know what it feels like to be on. What does it
Mm-hmm.
feel like? What do you like? Some days I wake up and I'm like, I'm on today. I've got it. Within the first 5 minutes, you just feel it. It's nothing that a metric can tell you or a data set. You just know it, right? And here, like, I just feel really good about this. It's like Hayden was asking me about we can end it on this one. Hayden with a little bit of humor today. Hayden was joking with me earlier. No, over the weekend he was like, "Who should I cheer for in the games? Should I cheer for Villanova or Kansas?" And I said, just go with your gut, man. He was good. He goes, "What does that mean?" And I said, well, you just got to go with your gut. I was like, some people make decisions based off, who should win, or is it home court advantage, or who's ranked higher. And I said, I said, I always like to just go with my gut. What's my gut telling me? And so he goes, all right, I'm gonna go with my gut. And so, and he's sitting on the couch and he bends his head down as close as he can into his stomach. And what are you doing? He goes, I'm listening for my gut. And I was like, so what did your
That's
gut tell you?
outstanding.
No, he said, I said, what'd your gut tell you? He said, my gut told me to cheer for Kansas. And I said, all right, I'll go with your gut. So that's his thing now. He's like, he'll ask me like who to cheer for, who I think's gonna win. I said, listen, buddy, always dad goes with his gut. You should go with your gut too. And he'll bend down as low as he can and try to listen to his stomach. And he's like, all right, well, my gut says this. And I'm like, perfect. But that's that thing, like, but I just go with your gut. Or my gut told me this, or my heart's just like, that's when right? And if you can do those things, right, in all seriousness, if you can listen to your body and pick up those signals on race day, you're going to be so much better off. And not just in race day, but like all the weeks and months leading up to race day that allow you to get to race day in the best possible position, or is knowing, and we preach it till I'm sure people are nauseated hearing about it. It's like, listen to your body in training and knowing when to peel it back, right? Or readily knowing if you should just really, really aim low for the week. It's like you're giving yourself room to succeed, right? You're not over promising yourself to failure because you're going to shoot too high even though you shouldn't. Like, it's a learned skill, and it is something that athletes are becoming very detached from, because of how many data points are available for every single thing that you do that you can't possibly, right? The most simplistic way I can explain it or give an example is listening to your feet hit the pavement and listening to the sound of your breath when you run with nothing versus running with music blaring in your ears. Right? You're immediately push to do something different, whether it's, I mean, there's been numerous studies like, your music comes down that's more slower pace, you slow down. Music comes back up, it's a little higher beat, you speed up, right? You're not listening to yourself, you're going with, a flow that's not yours, right? You should be going with your flow, listening to your breathing, the signs of that you should slow down instead of what your watch says. These are all things you can just get by paying attention, right? But it's not nearly as fun. And I get that. Like I listen to music sometimes, but I also try to be really understand like my own warning signs of, that I'm getting close to the, red alert, to the alarms going off versus like, hey, I'm feeling pretty good today. Screw what my watch says, screw what I think is possible. Just go with it today. And again, you can practice that in racing, but when it comes down to being able to apply it in training, there's also a certain level of confidence you have to have that you gain from training. But then once you apply it over and over again in real, real life, quote unquote, real race situations, can really start to pay off in the long run.
Yeah. And we've talked about music a lot, and I like to run with it too. I mean, it's just more enjoyable, and I think it is a little bit of a, a performance enhancer on some level. But that to me, I think it's a real thing when you get to races and you can't deal with it, and there is something if you're not used to that. And like I always say is like, a lot of times going faster just means letting yourself go faster, not trying so hard. Some days you might feel good, just release it, man, because it's like, if we're holding back our bodies, there's tension there, there's energy burn, there's all that kind of stuff. Sometimes we just got to let it go. And for me, that usually comes down to that. I haven't been able to do this in a full, don't get me wrong, but like in a half, sometimes I'm able to get to that, whatever, mile 10. And like I always tell people, we always say, if you got something left, let it out, let it go. And I always try to reiterate though, that doesn't mean going from 90% effort to 100% effort in 5 steps. It's like being so in tune with your body. And that's why I love to train by effort and understand that so much, because you can literally, kind of grade that up slowly in a way, and time it to the end. And then instead of like, because that's, I think, a big mistake is like, oh, I feel good, I'm going to go now. And then it's like the next thing you know, they're flying way out of their zone, and then they crash and burn at the end. So
You go with what you got, and that, like, go watch the end of Oceanside when you had Rudy Von Berg and Lionel Sanders, running toe to toe the last 200 meters. Do you think they were checking their watch to see like, maybe I should slow down? Can you imagine the sight of that? Right? Was to see, I'm supposed to be holding 520s and it says 517. Go ahead, you got it. Like, I'm just gonna go with my watch this day. Or Ironman South Africa was down to like the last quarter mile. You had two guys, like a guy looked like he was gaining on the guy in first place, and he kept looking behind him, which is like, I know the Mike Tarrolly like big pet peeve. Like, you talked about that watching the Tour de France a few years ago. People, if you turn around, you're gonna get caught. That's it. That's the rule of thumb. You turn, and this guy kept turning, like, stop turning around. Like, what are you looking at? And the guy chasing him was like, he kept looking at his watch, and the commentator's like, why are you looking at your watch? Who cares? Like, just run as fast as your body allows you to do. And that's just one of those things that we get so caught up in those things that we forget to just, freely see what your body's able to give. But I get it. If you're relatively new to the sport, it's something that you have to do by racing. And that's why I'm always a fan of, race as much as you want, race as much as you can, sprints, Olympics, because it's all learning experience. It's all, no matter how tapered you are, how non-tapered you are, no matter how ready you are for it or not, you learn something every single time. And so when you get out in these early season races, April and May, and you've got a whole different season waiting for you, like, nothing is a failure, right? Nothing. As long as you go into a race understanding and acknowledging that you're going to learn something from the day, then I think you're set up for success.
Well, let me give a quick shout out to Jackson Laundry. That's a sweet name.
It is. Hayden made a comment about that. He goes, "Why is his last name Laundry?" And I was like, "That's just his last
I don't
name."
know.
Like, I don't
Congrats
know.
to
It's like,
him.
Jackson does his laundry, but he's probably had people do it for him. But he in his run form was just unreal. Yeah, it was really was unbelievable to watch him blow by, because he got past, or he came out of the gate with Alistair Brandley and Rudy Von Berg and I think Sam Appleton. Trying to think of the other guy might have been. And he came back with like maybe 2 miles, and he was just, I mean, gassed it. I mean, gassed. And he even said after the race in his interview, he said, this, like, you go to bed the night before race and you predict, right? Like, not predict, but you picture everything going right the way it's supposed to go. Everything from start to finish. He said, and today was that day. Everything went right from start to finish. But the truth of the matter is that, like, there's one of those. For all the races you're ever going to do, there's one of those. But it doesn't mean we don't keep coming back for more. And we hope you keep coming back for more on Thursday. Look at that segue. One of my better ones. Thanks. As always, go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. You can always click on the coaching tab, peruse our roster of coaches. Also go on the online store and support us by purchasing some gear, sweatshirts, water bottles, coffee mugs, long sleeve tees, short hats, all the like. It's a great way to support the cast and rub some great, comfortable, and awesome gear. If you need to go hold on Mike, he's available at crushingiron@gmail.com. And if you need anything from me specifically, I'm at c26coach@gmail.com.
All right, buddy. I'll catch you later, man.
See you, dude.